Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Counterculture Media Podcast. I'm your host, Alex Anderson, and today I am joined by the very wonderful Kris Godinez. How are you today, Kris?
I'm fabulous. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. It's nice and warm here in Colorado. How's Boise treating you?
It's freaking cold.
Yeah.
I woke up this morning, it was 21 degrees, and then John was like, Siri, what's the temperature in Arizona? And it was like nice and toasty and warm, and I'm like, oh my God. So,
I like having friends across the country so you can kind of not brag about the weather, but at least be like, hey, how's Arizona treating you when it's like 60 degrees on a summer day in Colorado? And they're like, my shoes are melting to the pavement.
right, that's the bad thing. In the summertime, it's 115 to 120.
Yeah.
And in wintertime, it's gorgeous, and everybody else is all jealous. And I'm like, no, you don't understand. Those 3 months are killer.
Yeah. You really got to trade off, like if
Yeah,
you want to live there full time.
for sure.
So today we're here to talk about the stigma of mental health. Before we start, would you like to tell everybody a little bit about yourself?
So I am a licensed professional counselor. I have been doing this professionally since 2006. I got my LPC, which allowed me to open my private practice in 2009. I specialize in helping domestic violence targets get out of the abusive relationships, but I do a little bit of everything. And I've written 2 books. One is called What's Wrong with Your Dad? And the other one is You Can Lead a Horse, but You Can't Make Him Cha-Cha, both about personality disordered abusers. So if you're interested in those, there's that. I do a weekly show on YouTube called We Need to Talk with Kris Godinez. And it's, again, all about surviving abuse, how to get out, what to do, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
And first of all, one of the best book titles I've ever come across in my entire life is You Can Lead a Horse to Water, but You Can't Teach It to Cha-Cha.
Right. Well, and it's talking about why some people stay in abuse and others get out, so it's kind of like that whole, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink.
Yeah, you can teach people, but you can't tell them how to live their lives, pretty much,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
And what was it that made you decide that you wanted to pursue a life of psychology?
Well, to be perfectly honest, my family was completely dysfunctional. They put the fun in dysfunction.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what steered me into becoming a counselor, because I survived a really abusive childhood, and I went, you know what? If I can survive it, I can teach other people to survive as well. And so that's kind of what steered me into counseling.
And that's, I feel like, a really brave thing to do, because even just going to therapy as like a normal human being, it's kind of like it's a process. It's definitely something that's makes you grow and evolve, but actually taking that burden upon yourself, like, okay, I figured out how to fix it. Like, I can do my best to help other people, like, learn how to fix it themselves. And
Right. And
so, yeah.
leading into your topic, there is so much stigma about going to a therapist, because think of it this way. For me, coming from a dysfunctional family, my dad, who was the abuser, was like, no child of mine is in therapy. You're perfect. There's nothing wrong with you. Because he was a narcissist. He was borderline, and he was narcissist. And so everybody around those types of abusers have to be perfect. And so they deny therapy to the kids who clearly need it, and they won't go get help. And so there's this huge stigma of only broken people go to therapy. Well, no shit, Sherlock. If you're broken, you go get. So here's the deal. If you're a healthy, normal person, you break a leg, you go to a doctor to set the leg so it'll heal correctly. For some reason, we as a society, if there's something wrong mentally, we make fun of the person, and we're like, no, walk around with a broken leg, as
Yeah.
opposed to go to the doctor and fix it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So there is definitely a stigma. Yeah.
And it sounds like it can very much be familially inherited.
Yes,
Because
absolutely.
what I hear from a lot of people is, I know from my family, I come from a household where what happens in our house stays in our house. Like, this is our business and nobody
Our
else.
little secret. So
Yeah.
think of it this way. Abuse thrives in the dark. If there's no spotlight on it, they can do whatever they want to. But if you've got a kid that's going to a therapist and going, okay, mom and dad are doing this, the abuse is probably not going to continue, because either that therapist is going to call DCS, or they're going to call the parents and go, what the are you doing? You
Yeah.
know, if they're a good therapist. So
Yeah. And would you say that is being young a good time to start therapy? Like, assuming you don't come from like a healthy household, I'd say.
yeah, so as soon as you recognize there's a problem, so it's only a problem if it's a problem, right? So like, you're in a series of relationships and they're all kind of, you know, the same issues over and over again, and you realize, holy crap, I'm dating my mom, I'm dating my dad, what the hell? Because we do, when we're coming from a dysfunctional family, our inner child goes, okay, I had a problem with mom or dad, whoever the most difficult parent was. Our inner child looks outside of ourselves and goes, okay, if I can, oh, look, here's this person that reminds me of mom or dad. If I can make them love me, I prove the original family wrong. So if they didn't love me, but I can make them love me, who's just like mom or dad, I prove mom or dad wrong. The problem of it is you get half of a shit sandwich, half of a shit sandwich, total shit sandwich.
You get a whole shit sandwich.
You get a whole shit sandwich. Yep.
And my therapist talks to me about the inner child a lot. And it's something that I'm coming to understand. You don't think that your childhood really affects you as much as it does.
Oh my
It's like
God.
I was a different person when I was a kid, and I've learned and I've grown, and that's just behind me now. And that's just not the case, right?
Nope. Our inner child stays with us. It really does. And most of the time when we come from dysfunctional families, the thing I hear the most is that the dysfunctional parent will say horrible things to the kid and have the excuse of, oh, they're young, they'll survive, they'll, you know, they won't remember this, they'll, you know, they're kids are bounceable, they you know, they can grow from this, they'll be fine, they don't remember. No, we take every single thing our parents say to us to heart. And even though we grow up and even though we change, somewhere in that little kid is all of that nasty stuff that the parents have told us.
Yeah.
You know, and so, and it comes out in the weirdest times. So for example, when I was a much younger counselor, totally off topic, but did you know that YouTube's Boy album is 40 years old now?
What?
YouTube's Boy album is 40 years old, their first big, huge album.
Yeah.
And I'm here going, damn, I'm ancient. What the hell? But anyway, when I was a younger counselor, if I had like an alcoholic or a drug addict get into my face and start screaming at me, on the outside, I could be perfectly calm because I mastered that ability to not show fear in the face of danger kind of thing. But on the inside, my inner child was freaking the fuck out because that's what my dad would do. My dad would rage. And the next thing you knew, he'd be hitting me. And he was 6'5" and had hands like a frying pan. So, you know, so yeah, that fear, all of that stuff still lives within that inner child. And that's why it's important to work on comforting that poor little guy, that poor little girl, you know, that had to go through all of that dysfunctional, abusive, whatever, because the inner child will end up running the show if we allow it. So really what it is you want to get back into communication and into relationship with your younger self. And so you work the Inner Child Workbook by Cathryn Taylor, and you start realizing, okay, at this age, this happened, or at this age, that happened. Because we don't always cognitively remember stuff. Sometimes it's body memory. So there's a great book by Bessel van de Kolk called The Body Keeps Score. So when my dad was doing his alcoholic, narcissistic, borderline craziness, I would get these horrible stomach aches, and they drug me to all of these, you know, doctors, and not one of them put it together, because obviously I'm old, but back in the day, not one of them put it together that kids express anxiety through physical symptoms. I mean, today it's kind of a duh, you know, but back then they never put it together.
Yeah. And because you hear about people like, I can do yoga all day, I can go to a chiropractor, I can go to my clinical physician, and I can talk about all of these different things, and there's still something like wrong with my body. And it could be like, a metaphor could be like, if you fall and you hurt your knee when you're a kid, like if you ignore it, when you get older, it's going to flare up. It's going to be an injury that you never addressed at the time.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. That is a great metaphor. Yeah, exactly. So, and think about it. It's like kids don't always have the cognitive ability to express what's going on. Like I could not have put into words, dad is physically aggressive, dad is physically abusive, dad is verbally abusive, blah, 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 because I was like 5.
Yeah.
And when you have a dysfunctional family, they normalize the dysfunction. So
Yeah.
you think that that's normal. So you don't recognize that dad coming home in a bad mood, pouring himself a bourbon and then slapping you across the room isn't normal. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So the little kid inside, we start internalizing it. We start making it into our body. So it becomes body aches. A lot of survivors of abuse have got autoimmune issues. They've got, chronic fatigue syndrome. They've got lupus. They've got, stomach issues, irritable bowel syndrome. They've got Crohn's disease. They get a lot of autoimmune issues because they have internalized and physicalized everything that they had to take in when they were kids.
Yeah, and I had a good conversation with a chiropractic friend of mine, and he posed the question that really stuck with me, like, what is health? Because you can go and see a doctor, and a doctor can give you pills. You can go see a chiropractor. He can make your bones feel better. But at the same time, he talks about how, like, a lot of chiropractors work with, well, how's your home life? Well, okay, you have stomach ulcers. We can give you a lot of pills and a lot of medications to fix that. But
why? Why do you have stomach ulcers?
yeah.
This is the important thing. This is what drives me crazy about westernized medicine, is that they treat it like somehow magically the body and the mind are two completely different things and they don't talk to each other. And I'm sitting there looking at these people going, what drugs are you smoking? Because that is not even remotely true. How we think affects how our body responds. So here's a great example. You can imagine right now that you are in the middle of a plain and there's a whole herd of bulls charging at you. And you're standing there and you can feel the ground rumbling. Okay, what is your heart doing right now? It's starting to pound. Yeah, because our amygdala cannot tell the difference between an actual event and a thought about an actual event. So we are constantly, if we are being abused and we have these thoughts, this little guy, this little amygdala is acting up all the damn time. So let me break it down. So here's your brain, left side, right side. The amygdala is an almond-shaped organ that sits about an inch inside each ear. This little guy is responsible for our fight, flight, freeze, or fawn center. So when it gets stimulated, it tells the hippocampus or the hypothalamus to release cortisol. So cortisol gets released into the body. Now we're tense because we're getting tensed up. Our muscles are getting tensed up so we can fight, flight, freeze, so that the predator just goes on by and does not see us. Just like bunny rabbits do. You know how they freeze and they're like, you can't see me. And I'm like, yes, I can. But it's like, okay, it's not going to see me. It's not going to see me. It goes away. Or fawn, give into the predator so that we don't get harmed. So that's kind of, that's like you're hoping that you can charm the predator enough so that you don't get killed. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. So at this point, we're tense. Our ears and shoulders have become one. Heart is racing, racing thoughts, the whole thing. At this point, another part of the brain kicks in and goes, holy shit, there's no oxygen, CO2. We really are going to die. Tells the adrenal gland that sits on top of the kidneys to release all at once. Now we are shaking like a leaf, racing thoughts, pounding heart, pounding heart. And at this point, people go into a panic attack, which is the, I can't breathe it, oh my God, and then they keel over because they're hyperventilating. Or they turn into the Incredible Hulk and have a rage attack, because think about it. Anger is part of the fight, flight, freeze, or fawn response, because if you're acting like Bruce Banner turning into the Incredible Hulk, nobody in their right mind is going to fuck with you.
Yeah.
Unless they're stupid and want to die.
Right.
So, but because of that, because our amygdala gets turned on so easily, we get adrenal fatigue. So any trigger, anything that reminds us of our abuser or any dangerous situation, our adrenal gland gets turned down because our body is going, okay, go, 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 get out of there, get out of there, get out of there. And so we're up here all the time. And eventually your adrenal gland is just going to give you the middle finger and go, I'm done.
I don't want to do this anymore.
Yeah, exactly. So the body and the mind are not separate. They are not separate. You must treat it holistically. You must treat anything physical issue holistically. What are you thinking? How are you thinking it? How is your thoughts? How are you feeling? Do you see where I'm going with that? Like,
Yeah.
not just physically feeling, but mentally feeling, physically feeling, emotionally feeling, spiritually feeling. It is not separate. It is all one.
Mm-hmm. Because even when I was going through the worst of my panic attacks, my anxiety, your body is literally afraid to die. And after finding that out, like, okay, this is very much all going on in my head, but all of the responses in your body when you're going through some really extreme terror, paranoia, all these different things, it makes so much sense when you put it into the perspective of just like, okay, my body thinks we're dying. This is great.
Yeah. Well, it's just like you ask any writer, right? When they write really intense scenes, I mean, because I do writing on the side. Obviously, I've written 2 psychological books, but I also write romance novels. And so when I'm doing, I may publish those. I haven't decided yet.
It's a good market, man. I mean, like, I really thought about getting into romance on the side just because people love romance novels.
They're fun.
Yeah.
So, but like when I'm doing a really intense scene and the heroine or the hero is in danger, I can feel my heart starting to pound and my breath starting to shorten because my body is responding as if that danger were really happening, even though I'm sitting in my office with the heater on and my dog next to me and a cup of coffee and everything's fine.
Yeah.
Do you see where I'm going with that? That's why I'm saying the mind and the body are connected and you cannot separate them.
Yeah. And it's interesting. I've always heard of fight or flight. I've never heard of the freeze or fawn aspect of it. I really appreciate you telling me that. Like, but it leads back to, like, psychology in and of itself is not a very old practice.
No.
Right? Like, as far as the human span goes.
It's probably 1800s when Freud, the father of psychology, really did his thing. And I hate Freud. I got to tell you, he was a dick.
Yeah.
So, he tried to get Adler and Jung disbarred, basically, taken out of the role of psychiatrists because they dared to come up with their own modality. He was a total narcissist. Narcissist. Yeah.
I'm very much a Jungian man myself, just because. Yeah. And I really like how later in his life he decided to explore archetypes and spirituality and kind of went a little bit crazy. So
he kind of veered off into existentialism, which I think is really cool. So yeah.
But
absolutely.
we talked.
Yeah, and so it's connected. Yeah.
We talked about how we inherit, like, familial stigma. Do you feel like there's kind of like since psychology hasn't been around for too long, do you think there's like a generational stigma of why people are kind of afraid to go to therapy?
Absolutely.
Because we look back and it's kind of like when you look back at
absolutely.
Yeah, like you look back at doctors who used to put leeches on people, and that was kind of like, yeah, this is what you do. And then you look far back in, like, the history of psychology into things like where the term hysteria came from,
Oops, wait a minute. I just lost you. Where did it go? Oh, crap. Hang on. Okay, there I am. Sorry.
No problem.
I found you again. You're good.
The wonders of our new technological communication.
I know. So, yeah, I do think that there is a societal thing because remember, think about it. When Freud was doing his thing, it was still considered, out there. It wasn't, acknowledged. And even today, it's considered a quote unquote soft science. And the reason being is because you cannot put absolute numbers to it. Most of the studies are behavioral, meaning people's behaviors. So you can't necessarily quantify, qualify, or put it into statistics kind of thing. Whereas with, say, for example, chemistry, well, there's no arguing that H2O is water. You know what I'm saying? But there is arguing over what constitutes a mental illness and what doesn't. Do you see where I'm going with that? So
yeah, and psychology has very much it's become a harder science, and a lot of people use the harder science, like pharmaceutical companies use the harder science to not the best, like, oh, okay, well, your body's creating these chemicals. Here's some pills.
Here, have some drugs.
And it's one of those very medical things where they're treating the what's the word I'm looking for?
The symptom. They're treating the symptom a lot of times.
Yeah, the
So
symptom instead of
what
the
I
cause.
see happening is that, yes, the older generation is very loath to go to counseling. They're very loath, excuse me, to go get help. And I think that is born out of the whole, and this is American society. This isn't European society. You realize in European society, they're a lot more open to counseling and things like that. In America, it's very much that pull yourself up by the bootstraps, you know, you can do this, you don't need anybody, blah, 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 you know, that kind of thing. And for some reason, you're less than if you need help. And the reality of it is people who are able to ask for help are actually the sanest people on the face of the planet, because they know when they're in over their heads. Whereas somebody who's like, I'm going to do this on my own, and then they go over the cliff and they're like, why did I go over the cliff? Well, because you didn't ask for help, dumbass. You know, I mean.
Yeah, I think it is something that's very bred into our culture, like even from our Quaker roots, kind of like the just the whole religious aspect of God will treat your illnesses. You don't need to worry about anything yourself.
Right, or ignore it and it'll go away. No, nothing ever gets better if you ignore it, and it certainly never goes away. So
yeah. And there's I feel like there's a lot of stuff built into our culture that even people in our generation probably, or like people who are still alive today, have memories of. Like you think about people who performed full frontal lobotomies on housewives that just didn't listen to their husbands. Like the whole approach to helping people out.
That long ago. That was in the 1950s.
Exactly, yeah.
1960s. Up until the 1970s, being gay was considered a mental illness. I don't know who the fuck decided that one, assholes. But do you see where I'm going with that?
Yeah.
I mean, it's just amazing to me the things, how my profession has changed over the years, and thankfully it's getting better. But yeah, I mean, they would do horrible things to people in the mental health institutions. I've heard people say things like, oh, well, you know, we need to bring back the institutions. No, motherfucker, we don't.
No.
We don't. I mean, that is where abuse occurs. And they would perform lobotomies to keep them quiet. They would, oh my God, the worst is the shock therapy.
Yeah.
They would treat them with shock therapy, which makes them basically a drooling piece of meat for like days on end, but it keeps them quiet. And they would do that. And they would abuse people, and they would over-medicate them. I am not a big proponent of medications. Here's the deal. The only time you should be medicating, oh, sorry, this is where I was going with that whole rant. I will sometimes have older people come to me, and they'll go through grief, right? And they'll be like, oh, I'm grieving the loss of my spouse. We were married for 45, 50 years. Give me a pill. And I'm sitting there looking at them going, you just lost your spouse of 45 or 50 years. You actually liked them. You are grieving. Allow yourself to go through the grief process instead of shortcutting it with an antidepressant that is going to, it'll make you feel better, but all you're doing is delaying the grieving process.
Yeah, but that's a solution for them, because back in the day, like the feel-good happy housewife pills, it's just something that's kind of in their generational culture, where it's just like, well, no, doctors figured this out a long time ago. I don't have to be sad, or I don't have to be anxious if I don't want to.
Oh, but here's the deal. We grieve. Mammals grieve. Mammals cry when they feel pain. I think they cry when they feel emotional pain. I get sick and tired of people telling me that animals don't have emotions. Fuck yeah, they do. So, so when we feel pain, we cry. And the grieving process, a normal grieving process, takes approximately 2 years. So the first year is getting through all of the firsts, the first Thanksgiving, the first Christmas, the first New Year's, the first Easter, the first anniversary, the first birthday, and then the anniversary of the death. The second year is you move the person from the present into a different place in your heart. So it's like, okay, yeah, they're not coming back. Because it takes, we as humans, it takes us a long time to realize that death is permanent and they're not coming back. Yeah. And so we have to move them into, I'm going to start crying, Jesus Christ. You have to move them into a different place in your heart, so that when you think about them, you can think about them with joy and know that they're not coming back, but that you love them, and it's okay to think about them, and it's okay to cry, and it's okay to feel whatever you're feeling. With complicated grief, and complicated grief is if your abuser dies, right? And this is really hard for kids, and when I say kids, I mean adults, I mean kids, I mean anybody. If the abuser was a parent, we have very complicated, which is why it's called complicated grief, feelings about the abuser. We simultaneously love them because they're our parent, but we also hate them for the shit that they did. So while we're going through the grieving process, it is a fucking roller coaster, of emotions.
Yeah.
And so that can take up to 3 years to resolve itself. If you get help, it helps shorten it. But do you see where I'm going with that?
Yeah, I feel like grief is one of the biggest things that humans were never really, not humans, I'll say Americans. Americans were never really trained
So
to figure
here's the
out
deal.
how to deal with.
Previously, we did. So prior to the Civil War, I know now we're getting into a history lesson. I love it.
No, I
So
love history, yeah.
prior to the Civil War, we would have wakes at home. So the person would die at home. They wouldn't go to a hospital to die. They died at home. And then the family would bathe the body and dress it and then have the wake, making sure that they weren't just, in a coma. That's what wakes were for, was to make sure that the person didn't wake up. That's why they're called wakes. And so 3 or 4 days, okay, nope, they're not waking up. All right, now we need to bury them. And so it was a very intimate process of, okay, this person really is dead. Yes, they're not breathing. No, they're not coming back. Yes, they are starting to decay. Okay, we need to put them in the ground, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there was no weirdness about it. When shit got weird was around the Civil War. So in the Civil War, they started embalming people. Prior to that, embalming wasn't really done because you had your wake, you made sure they were dead, blah, blah, blah. With the Civil War, they had to start embalming the soldiers to send them back home so that the family could verify, yes, it was them, and then bury them.
And they had to embalm them because they wouldn't survive the train ride, right?
Think about it. Think about it. Civil War, Gettysburg, July. 2nd, 3rd, and 4th. Middle of summer.
Oh, God.
Yeah. 50,000 dead soldiers. 50,000 in the middle of summer. Can you imagine how stinky that was?
I mean, I feel like when I go to the South during the summer, I'm decaying and I'm alive, so I can.
Right. Exactly. So that's why they did it, was to preserve the bodies. But then what happened was a whole funeral industry sprang up over that. Laws started happening. Nope, you can't handle the dead bodies. There's too many diseases. There's too many that. Nope, you can't die at home. You have to go die in a hospital. So we became very removed from death so that it becomes a very unnatural event. And the truth of the matter is, back in the day, the mortality rate for children was huge. It was like 50% or more, and now the mortality rate for children is way less than that. So, we don't handle death well because we're not around it. And in fact, I'm going to have a mortuary woman expert come on the show to talk about that someday. So
that would be beautiful. Yeah, because because the only people who teach us how to deal with death are, our religions, if we have them. They talk more about what happens afterwards than, actually dealing with the process when it happens.
Right.
If you've got good parents or good people around you, then you're able to like learning about death at a young age is important. Right. Because nobody told me what was going on when I went to grandma's funeral. Nobody had given me the faintest inkling of what death was. And here I am, like a little 6-year-old, just like, why isn't grandma going to get back up anymore? Like, nobody explained it to me even before I went to the funeral. It's like, that was how I learned about death, was seeing a dead body for the first time.
And think about it this way too. People who are disordered tend to be fearful of death because they can't control it. Yeah. And disordered people tend to be control freaks. I'm talking about personality disorders. So they hate death because they cannot control it. And so they won't talk about it. They'll act like it's never going to happen. Humpty Dumpty is the best way to teach a child about death. Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall. Humpty Dumpty had a great fall. All of the horses and all the king's men could not put Humpty back together again. Humpty died.
It is the end of what we perceive as this permanence that kind of like we learn object permanence when we're a kid, and then the next lesson we have to learn is like it's not permanent.
Nope.
And I feel like what's okay.
My phone you're thinking.
And I feel like that's one of the best, like for me personally, when I started getting into therapy, it was because I was experiencing grief and not really and had no idea how to deal with it, because I've dealt with death before, but since we live in kind of we live in a modern age where every time I had experienced death before, it's been like grandpa's in Utah and grandpa died, or my friend died halfway across the country or halfway across the world. And you
Right.
have this like internalized grief. But what happened when in Arizona was I was in a hospital room and I saw somebody breathe their last breath for the first
Yeah.
time ever. And nobody prepares you for that unless you have. That's why I feel like therapists are godsends pretty much, because
Right.
even if I didn't have anybody there to really say like, hey, this is going to probably be the hardest thing you ever experience in your life,
Right.
and it really tore me up and put me in a really bad place, there was somebody who was there for me, who was able to say like, hey, it's okay that you're feeling this. Like, nobody talked to you about this, but let me explain to you
Right.
what grief is and what grief does to you.
Normalizing it. And that is the biggest problem in our country, is we don't talk about the hard subjects.
Yeah.
And we should. And we need to teach our kids, and we need to teach each other, and we need to be respectful. And there's a definite lack of that in this country. So
Yeah, being able to talk about your emotions, I feel like, is one of the largest stigmas that keeps people away from therapy. And like we were talking about,
exactly.
yeah.
Because what are we told? And especially think of the gender roles. Think of all the
Yes.
gender roles that we have. So men are told, don't you feel, don't you cry, big boys don't cry, blah, blah, blah. So about 20 years ago, 30 years ago, men were dropping dead at an alarming rate in their 30s and 40s. Let's take a look at why. If you're constantly telling somebody not to express their emotions, where the hell do you think those emotions are going? Into the body. And that's why guys were dropping dead of freaking hypertension and heart attacks at age 30 and 40.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, absolutely.
I mean,
Validate your emotions. They're real. They're there.
I am definitely like, it would be proper to call this like toxic masculinity. Like this is,
Totally toxic.
yeah,
Yes,
like
absolutely.
I'm a victim of this, because even like between the ages of like 17 and 20 something, which in hindsight were probably like the worst and most emotional years of my life because of family stuff, I
Right.
had this thing where whenever I talked about emotions with people, I would always brag. I would brag and say, I haven't cried in like 6 years. What are you guys talking about? It's just one of those things that's internalized, and it probably goes back to childhood. Yeah.
No, absolutely. So for me, coming from an abusive father, it was not safe to cry around him, because narcissists and malignant borderlines do not like emotions from anybody else. So if any of us ever cried in front of him, his favorite line was, I'll give you something to cry about. And then he would.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
So
it's and it sucks. Like the stigma really sucks, because in hindsight, going through it, it took me going through one of the hardest things in my life for me to actually have to decide, you know what, if I don't embrace these emotions that are buried inside, they're gonna hurt me and everyone else around me. And
exactly, because it comes out sideways. Our anger will come out sideways. If we don't, emotions are not bad. So here's the thing. What I hear people say is, oh, there are bad emotions. No, no, there are not. Emotions, all emotions are good. It's what we do with them that make them harmful or helpful. Anger, for example, everybody's got a weirdness about anger. They're like, no, 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 you can't express your anger. You can't be angry. You can't do this. Or toxic masculinity, raging, punching things, that kind of thing, right? So here's the deal. Anger is not a pure emotion. All of the other emotions are pure. Love is love, lust is lust, happy is happy, sad is sad. Anger is the bodyguard of the softer emotions. So it's the bodyguard of fear. It's the bodyguard of sadness. So when somebody is raging at me, I will look at them and take the wind out of their sails and say, what are you afraid of? And then usually they respond with, I'm not afraid of anything, motherfucker. Take a deep breath. Where's the sadness? Because you're dealing with the top emotion. What's underneath?
yeah,
Okay.
and after learning that, like it I don't know, it's kind of freeing when you find out, like, especially like if you are an angry person, just finding out like, okay, like if I can have the wisdom and the foresight to take a step outside of how I think I'm feeling right now. Take a breath and actually say, why am I feeling this way? And being able to say, like, I'm angry because this, and this, and then being able to pinpoint, like, okay, I'm not actually angry at all. Like, I'm terrified of this. This is why this makes me angry all the time, is because I'm terrified of loss. I'm terrified of commitment. I'm terrified of this, that, or the other.
Yep.
It just kind of, yeah, it's a reason why therapy helps.
Exactly.
Because we have this huge range of emotions
Yeah.
that's very human. And even when you start to embrace the emotions that you have, you still don't have, unless you have like a really wonderful support network who's very wise and very open to talking, you don't have the tools necessary to deal with what you're feeling. Like, okay, I acknowledge that I'm feeling things, but
Exactly.
now what the fuck do I do with it?
Exactly. So let me give you a great example. When my dad died, people used to joke with me that, this is Kris happy. Ah, this is Kris sad. Ah, this is Kris relaxing. Ah, I mean, I was pissed all the fucking time. And I couldn't figure out why, right? So I went back into therapy. I went into therapy when I was a teenager, but I went back into therapy after my dad, well, actually before my dad died, because I knew he was going to die and I didn't want to be stuck with all that shit. But I went back to my therapist and I was like, why the fuck am I just fucking pissed all the time? And she's like, let's take a look at your inner child. And I'm like, God damn it.
This again.
This again. What the hell? So yeah, working through the anger, it really was just a shit ton of just sad, because it was kind of like when my dad died, the saddest thing that my brother ever said, and it was just incredibly profound for somebody that's just exactly like my dad, but he said, now I'll never get his approval.
Oh, shit.
Now game over. I'll never get his approval. And it was all the if onlys, if only he'd been sane, if only he had gone to therapy, if only he'd been willing to work on himself, if only he'd been a good dad, if only. And then once I got rid of the anger and realized that was just keeping me safe, because honestly, when you're like that, nobody's going to come near you. Like, seriously.
Yeah.
It's like, I dare you, motherfucker. Come on. You know?
You become the angry chihuahua that nobody wants to pet. Yes.
Exactly. I was an angry chihuahua. So yeah, once you get that angry chihuahua off, I spent a lot of time in therapy just sobbing, just working out all of that sadness and loss and, abandonment and just, damn it never could have been normal. Yeah. So it's a little bit of reality therapy once you get rid of the anger. So yeah, if you find yourself angry all the time, it's really important. What's underneath it?
Yeah.
What are you protecting? Is it sadness or is it fear or is it both?
Yeah, and it's being able to take those emotions that you are recognizing and dealing with, and then putting some like objective truth towards why exactly, like what events, like, okay, I'm sad about what, and it's just like, oh well, here's a specific event that happened in your life, or like here's the facts of how you were treated,
Yeah,
and this is why you are feeling this way.
exactly. So, a great example is with this current weirdness politically, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when things
Oh,
started,
you're allowed to say fuck Trump on my
oh,
podcast.
thank you, fuck Trump. Yeah. So when Trump got elected, I had a ton of abuse survivors, my clients call me up freaking out because they're like, it's like my abuser won. It's like my abuser is now abusing me again. It's like, because they recognize the behaviors, and thank God Mary Trump came out and said that. He absolutely is a dark triad. Abso-fucking-lutely. And when he started doing all this political stuff with the elections, again, that's been the majority, believe it or not, for the last 4 months, most of the issues have been anxiety about what's going to happen because they recognize the abuse, and he would call it before he did it, which is what abusers do. They tell you exactly how they're going to abuse you, and then they do it.
Mm-hmm.
And so they were just freaking out going, oh my God, do we have to leave the country? Do we have to do this? Do we have to do that? And I'm just like, breathe. We'll just all meet in Mexico. Breathe.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, and I've seen a lot of just comparisons to, okay, well, now that we have gotten rid of this toxic abuser in our life, like, you think it's over. No, you've probably never gotten out of a toxic relationship before. Like, this is just the beginning. Like, getting out of the toxic relationship is the beginning of healing from the toxic relationship.
Exactly. And so when you are in a toxic relationship and you leave the abuser, then the real work starts. So that's when you have to work on your self-esteem, making sure your self-esteem is so rock solid that if an abuser, it's like, for example, people always ask me, they're like, well, you know, do you have to deal with a lot of narcissists now? And I'm like, nope, they don't even come sniffing around.
They're not dealing with it.
They know that I will call their ass out on it and I won't put up with it, you know?
Yeah.
And if somebody does try to get in, like every once in a while, it just cracks me up. You would think people would research who they're going to go see for a therapist, right?
Mm-hmm.
Every once in a while, I'll get some narcissist be like, oh, my wife says I'm narcissistic, so she wants me to come to you to fix me. I'm sorry, I'm not seeing clients right now. I'm not taking any new clients. Let me refer you over to somebody that does DBT. You know, I mean, I won't put up with it. I won't put up with it because I know what they are and they don't change. So,
and
yeah.
It's dealing with narcissists is nearly impossible. Like, they're the people who need therapy the most, and they're the ones who will say, I don't need it the most.
Oh yeah. So here's the deal. Seriously, listen to me now, believe me later. Anyone who tells you that they're sane is not. Anyone who tells you that they never make a mistake does. Anyone who tells, do you see where I'm going? Because they're always like, I'm perfect. I've never made a mistake. I don't need therapy, blah, 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 blah. And they will never go get help because they're not introspective. You and I can look at the mirror and go, okay, I know. It's kind of like the, is it the fourth step? I think it's the fourth step, where you do a fierce moral inventory in AA of all your faults. You know, a narcissist will never do that. They will tell you with a straight face that they have never made a mistake in their life and that they are perfect. My father's favorite thing to say was, I don't get lost, I just get temporarily confused. Meanwhile, we're out in the middle of the forest going, oh my God, we're going to die here. So
we're lost, but I'm not going to say anything.
Yeah, exactly.
And I feel like that's very important. One of my mantras over the last year of healing, like psychologically, emotionally, spiritually, is one of the biggest things I've come across is that vulnerability is strength.
Yes.
It's like the more open, the more honest, and honesty is one of the biggest ones out there. You have to be honest with yourself first, then you can be honest with other people. But because of my generation, I'm very good at making metaphors for video games. So the boss always tries to hide his weakness instead of admitting that he's there, or that it's there. So all the heroes are able to take down the boss every time because he has this weakness that he is just, I don't know, he hides instead of being like, okay, hit me right in the balls and I'll go down. Like,
right. Yeah, exactly. Well, it's kind of like that meme where it says a boss and the boss is up on the cart and the workers are down below pushing it and he's wielding the whip, you know, you go, you go, you go. Whereas a leader is at the front of the line. Come on, guys, we can do it. Come on, come on, we've got this. That's a lead. So that's the difference. So you're narcissist versus leader, somebody who's vulnerable and open and honest. And yeah, absolutely. And going back to what we were talking about earlier, because I know we just went on this huge tangent. Sorry.
No, that's fine. This is the counterculture tangent podcast. I feel like conversation should flow. Yeah.
So with the stigma with counseling too, is that in the beginning, Freud insisted on this blank screen. So the counselor was supposed to be absolutely no emotion, kind of gray rock, you know, no emotion, no nothing. The client was supposed to project all of their stuff onto the counselor and somehow magically talking about it that they would get better. Well, it doesn't work. Obviously, look at Woody Allen. So, you know, I mean, it's like that doesn't, and therapy should not be going on for 25 fucking years. I'm sorry. It should be like maybe 3 years if you've really got a lot of complicated issues going on. But then other than that, you should be like, okay, go fly, go, you got it, good, go, you know? So therapists were prohibited or at the very least, what's the word I'm looking for? Made fun of, stigmatized, whatever, for sharing, you know. Now, granted, you don't want a therapist that's talking about themselves the whole fucking time, obviously. Right. But like if a client comes up and they're like, I really want to talk about this subject, but I'm really scared to. Okay, well, what's the subject? Well, you know, incest. Okay, let me tell you my story so you don't feel so stigmatized.
Yeah.
Do you see where I'm going with that?
Yeah, one of the greatest traits I feel like a therapist can have, like, no, one of the traits a therapist has to have is empathy.
Yes.
If you can't
Yes.
relate to somebody's emotions, if you
You're not going to
don't
get it.
feel emotionally
Yep.
stable yourself, you can't. You have to help yourself before you can help anybody.
Right. Now, if this had happened in a Freudian counseling session, all of this, the only thing the Freudian would have done would have been like, okay. That's it. That's it.
Yeah,
And I'm like, how the fuck is that helpful? You
yeah.
know? So don't get me
Because I mean,
anyway.
there's this whole concept, like I always put it as the stranger on the airplane,
Mm-hmm.
where you're 100% more likely to tell a stranger on an airplane your deepest, darkest secrets than you are to tell the person you find closest in your life.
Right.
And you have the ability to say all this stuff because a stranger on an airplane is going to take off. You're never going to see them again.
Right.
Whereas a counselor has a strict set of moral guidelines and legal guidelines that say, I can't tell anybody what you say unless it puts
Exactly.
somebody else or yourself at physical
Well,
harm.
and so that's an interesting point because that brings up the shame factor. So when we feel a great deal of shame, it's harder to open up to a counselor. It's harder because, again, in our own heads, we're stigmatizing ourselves, thinking that somehow, oh my gosh, I feel so much shame and they're going to judge me. No, trust me, a good counselor does not judge because guess what? Our shit stinks too, So overcoming the shame, I think, is a lot of what prevents people from going into counseling because they've got so much shame going on. But if you've got a good counselor, the counselor is going to go, you're not the only one that's been molested. It's okay. It's not you. It's the abuser. It's not you. It's the abuser.
Yeah.
Taking that shame away and normalizing it, not normalizing the situation, but making sure that they understand there's no shame here. There's no shame here.
Yeah. And that's I don't know, that's like a definition of the stigma of it is like, if you're like, I'll use religion because I'm allowed to, because I was raised religious and it did a lot to fuck me up. But you are raised with this divine shame. It's not just like, you do have like a cultural shame, of course, like these are the things you don't talk about in public, but you are raised with this divine shame inside yourself, like, this is between me and God, and I cannot talk to anybody else about this.
Exactly. And that is where abuse thrives. If you can only go to that particular religion's counselor, like the pastoral counselor or the bishop or whatever your particular religion is, do you really think that they're going to rat out their own? No, they're not. Or what's the other Jehovah's Witnesses? So I have a lot of people that escape Jehovah's Witnesses and they will tell horrific stories of abuse, that have been going on, and that they had to go to their own, whoever that hierarchy is, and they couldn't go to an outside counselor. Well, yeah, because if they went to an outside counselor, hello, DCS, thank you.
Right? You know what's wrong? Your religion's abusing you.
Pretty much.
So I have a question that I've been wondering about ever since I started going to therapy with my therapist. It's like, as a therapist, do you have a therapist?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Dude, I'm telling you, I hear stories that will turn your shit white.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Because I deal with a lot of domestic violence, and I think the worst case was a baby that had, oh God, it was physical abuse, and there were bruises and there were cigarette burns, and I had to see the pictures. And then I called CPS. It was called CPS at the time. It's DCS now. But yeah, things like that, I couldn't sleep for weeks. You bet.
Yeah, because I mean, you've got to have a certain kind of fortitude to be able to, because you have the events that happened in your life that made you want to pursue psychology, and then
Right.
you're like, all right, I got this shit. I know how to deal with the shit, and then a waterfall of shit falls on you, and
Correct.
I just wonder, like, it's got to be so hard to deal with other people's problems like all
It,
day professionally.
it really isn't. The only time, like I said, the only time I've ever really truly had a meltdown moment was that case with the child abuse, because babies are so innocent, and and they're so vulnerable and they can't be protected if they've got a parent that's doing the abuse. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that really got, and of course I was terrified. I was like, please God, tell me I'm doing everything I can to protect this child. Because my worst nightmare would be getting the phone call, the baby's dead, you know,
Yeah.
that, and I would feel like, what did I
Could I have
forget? What
done?
did I not cover? How did I not do this? You know, what's going? So, no, actually, and people ask me that all the time. They're like, oh my gosh, isn't that draining? Isn't it whatever? Yeah, at the end of the day, I'm tired because, you know, you're having to think on your feet all the time, but it's so immensely satisfying to have a client go, you know what? I think I've got this. Is it okay if we stop therapy? Yep, I'm okay with that. You've got this. You've got all the tools. You know how to ride the bike. You've got your balance. Okay, go fly. Go be free.
Yeah.
Send me an email right when you get work. You know?
Yeah, and that's like such a stigma too. It's just like, I don't need a quack to tell me and like have me go to therapy for the rest of my life. It's like, no, if you find a good therapist, they're going to say, all right, I want you to be better.
Yeah, and I want you to have the tools. That's the big thing, is teaching people. That's why everybody's like, well, why do you keep recommending all these workbooks? Because I want you to do the work yourself. You know, I
Yeah.
need you to learn how to process stuff when it comes up. Because I'm not always, it's so funny. Sometimes I'll have clients be like, I wish you could move in with me. And I'm like, no, you don't. No, you really don't. I'm a slob. You don't want me living with you.
Yeah.
So, but really, it's learning how to deal with the crap that comes up without your therapist. So a good therapist will hand you all the tools, hand you the workbooks, work through it with you, make sure you got it, have you practice. And then when you're feeling like, honestly, it's like when the therapy sessions get to the point where it's like, you know, 15, 20 minutes in, the person's like, yeah, I really don't have anything going on. Everything's really good. Then I'll go, okay, do you want to do like a check-in monthly or every other month? And we'll see how that goes. And then if still nothing's going on, then we'll end. And then, yeah, I think I'll do that. Okay, great. You know?
And that's gotta be great. Like,
Yeah, it's a very satisfying feeling. Is it draining? Yes. And in fact, I'm actually working on a book on So You Want to Be a Therapist, to let people know what to prepare for,
mm-hmm.
you know, because you're going to be dealing with sometimes really, truly crazy people,
Yeah.
you know, and all sorts of situations. And you've got to be ready to deal with that stuff. So, yeah.
Okay.
But yeah, I love it. I love my job. Clearly, I mean, come on.
Yeah. I mean, I was watching your podcast and you're so charismatic and animated, and you can just tell, like, I know my shit, and you like, but you can get better, you know? Like,
Absolutely. That's the one thing I will not put up with, is that when people come onto my YouTube channel, which is We Need to Talk with Kris Godinez, and they try to play the victim. And I'm like, I'm sorry, you're not a tree. You're not rooted there. Leave.
yeah.
You know? It's like, you can do things to help yourself. Do those things.
Yeah.
You know? So.
All right. Well, coming up on the top of the hour here.
Okay.
Like, one of the biggest things that I really, really want to figure out is I've been doing a lot of work on myself. Mm-hmm. And it's been great. It's been eye-opening. I feel like I'm the best person I've ever been in my whole life.
Sweet.
And it's one of those things where it's like, man, because I'm going through a lot of family trauma right now. Right. Like my dad was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. It's a whole thing. And it's like, I want to tell people, you know, what's helping me deal with all this bullshit, like meditation, spirituality, and therapy. Like, how, but I feel like after a while, I'm saying it over and over again, and I don't want to sound preachy. I don't want to be like, well, I'm going to therapy, so I'm dealing with this better than you. Like, is there a way to convince somebody to go to therapy?
No, either somebody's ready to go to therapy or they're not. So, oh boy. You basically, what you do, it's kind of like you lay out the options for them. You know, it's like, so when somebody tells me, you know, they're struggling and they're like, well, I don't need therapy, blah, 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 blah. How's that working for you? Things getting better? Things moving? Things going forward? Or are you stuck in the same place? Maybe you need somebody to help kick your ass and move you forward.
Yeah.
You know?
As like emotionally mature as you can be, you're still going to come across a road bump or a brick wall where you find out, like, okay, I've done everything in my power to make this situation better, but I can't go any further. And that's when you find somebody who's been training their whole life to hand you a toolbox that says, this is how you fix your shit.
Right. Exactly. So the CPTSD, From Surviving to Thriving by Pete Walker, is great for dealing with abuse, whether it's familial or romantic. The Self-Esteem Workbook by Schiraldi is great for building your self-esteem so that you make yourself bulletproof. The Disease to Please by Harriet Braiker is about codependency so that you don't have to take care of everybody else, you take care of yourself. So there's tons. The Inner Child Workbook by Cathryn Taylor, there's tons of great books. And if you're into existentialism, slightly depressing, but a really good book is Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning.
Okay. And
So,
I'll make sure to make a list of this again and put a big list on the show notes so everybody knows where they can find these excellent resources. Because, and another thing, like I wish we had another hour and a half to talk about was I feel like one of the things that keeps people from therapy the most is the lack of access. Like
yes.
The American healthcare system doesn't really care.
The American healthcare system sucks ass. Can I tell you that? It fucking sucks ass, and it needs to fucking change. Don't get me started. Actually, too late. So the point is, yes, it absolutely does. And I do a sliding scale, and I get so sick to death of hearing colleagues, oh, well, I only take insurance and blah, blah, blah. Because you can only take insurance. You can't do a sliding scale. If you take insurance, they consider it insurance fraud. Fuck that shit. I don't take insurance. I do a sliding scale. I make sure it's accessible to whoever wants to have it because I'm a goddamn socialist. So, it's a thing. So,
hell yeah, comrade.
Power to the people. So it needs to be accessible to literally everybody. And it makes me sick to death when you have these insurance companies telling a provider, we'll only pay you $60. That's it. Or $30 or whatever. And I'm like, are you fucking kidding? Some people can't afford $60. They can't afford the copay. So insurance companies are a racket. Fuck Trump. Insurance companies are a racket. Just want to say that. All right.
Well, on that note, no, that's like, but
sorry,
what advice would you give to people who want to seek out counseling, want to seek out therapy, but just don't know where to start? They don't have insurance. They don't know who to talk to, where to turn. I got lucky enough with my therapist. Like I had a friend who was just like, this lady's amazing. And I was just like, we'll see. And she turned out to be completely amazing. But what do you do? Like, where do you start?
Okay, so first of all, you need to ask a whole bunch of questions. You've got to interview that therapist like a motherfucker, seriously, because you don't want to get a quack and you don't want to get somebody who doesn't know what they're doing. What is their modality? Number one, how do they do therapy? Is it CBT, which is cognitive behavioral therapy? Is it DBT, which is dialectic behavioral therapy? Is it reality therapy? Is it somatic therapy? I mean, there's a shit ton of modalities out there. You got to figure out which one is going to work best for you. Some people love CBT, other people don't. So it depends on what you are looking for. You also have to have a very clear goal in your mind. What do you want to achieve with this therapy? Because sometimes people do come sit on my couch and they're like, oh, I don't know. And then we spend like the first 2 sessions kind of figuring out where we need to go. So it's kind of a good idea to kind of have a clear idea of what you want to work on. If there is abuse in your past, you want a trauma-informed therapist, somebody who understands traumatic events. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So you want to just question how many years have they been in the business? Look at their reviews, see what the reviews have to say. If you can get a word of mouth review, that's the best because that says that somebody went to them and they liked them and they had good success with it. So and you want a therapist that doesn't keep you for years.
But word of mouth is great because hearing like, oh, this person changed my life is kind of like, especially if you know and love the person, just like, well, you're amazing, so they must have really helped you out. Yeah.
Right. So you can find good therapists. Well, you can find therapists on Psychology Today. Mm-hmm. So usually what therapists will do is they'll go put their advertisement up on Psychology Today, and you want to read through their bio. And if they specialize in everything, don't go to them.
Yeah.
You want ones that are like really focused in on what they do. So
And that's really important to find too, because they do because I've been on Psychology Day and they have tags like, okay, this therapist is trans friendly,
Right.
and culture has a lot to do with it too. Like, especially right now with Black Lives Matter, just like, I want, like, a Black person wants a Black therapist because, like, if I talk to an old white man, he's not going to know exactly what I'm going through, you know?
Not going to get it. And if you're trans or you're gay or you're questioning or whatever, and you go to a therapist who is, how's the word to put it? Bigoted, I guess would be a good way to say it.
Yeah.
You know, they're not okay with, you know, the LGBTQ community. They're not going to be a good therapist for you because they're going to be sitting there judging you the whole damn time.
Yeah, it's like going to your your church counselor when you want to talk about being gay, man. Like,
Yeah,
it's just
exactly.
not gonna. You know
Not
what
gonna
you need to do? You need to pray about it. If that doesn't work, we're gonna give you shock therapy.
Oh my God. Oh, don't get me started.
Yeah. So some good resources. Would you recommend Psychology Today? Like, is there, like, because that's the one that I hear pop up all the time. Like,
It's
it
the
has the
easiest.
most.
It has the most therapists on there. It's not every single therapist advertises on there, but it kind of gives you a broad kind of, you know, qualified therapists in your area kind of thing. But
Mm-hmm.
again, the best thing you can do, word of mouth, or you just interview the living crap out of them to make sure it's a good fit.
Yeah. And that's kind of a daunting process too, because being someone who does do sliding scale, it's just kind of like, oh, how much do I got to pay to figure out, like, how many sessions in am I going to find out that I'm, like, being interviewed by someone who's going to tell me how much they love Trump and yell at me for my alcoholism, you know? Because that was my first experience.
Oh, Lord.
But
Yeah, no, yeah. You want to make sure that they're compatible. You absolutely do. You just want to make sure,
so,
you know.
like, first session, get all the shit you want to ask out of the way. Like, do I want to talk to this person about my deepest, darkest self?
Right, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, and do you have a good recommendation for a website where you can find out exactly what kind of psychology you should pursue?
So what you will do is you can look up modalities, just Google it, you know, psychological modalities, and it will pop up all the different, and there's literally, I'm not kidding you, there's hundreds.
Yeah.
There's like hundreds of different ways of doing counseling. So, you know,
Okay.
there's EMDR, there's EFT, there's CBT, DBT, you know, all these wonderful acronyms. You know, you just kind of got to look through them and see what works.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, the human experience is all trial and error.
Much.
Yeah. All right. So thank you so much for taking an hour out of your day to talk to me. I learned a lot, and I'm glad we got a lot out on the table. I really hope people take a lot out of this. One more time, like, your podcast is amazing, and it's called We Need to Talk. Look it up on YouTube by Kris Godinez. And do you want to plug your books as well?
Yes, it's called What's Wrong with Your Dad, which is my autobiography about growing up with a dad that was personality disordered and an opiate addict and an alcoholic. And then the other one is called You Can Lead a Horse to Water, but you can't make him cha-cha, which is about why some people stay in abuse and others get out.
All right. Well, yeah, thank you very much. I still haven't found a good way to segue into the end of interviews, and I'm usually very awkward about it. So I think I'm just going to just say that as the end of the interview.
Well, thank you for having me. I had a great time, and I'd love to come back and do it again.
Yeah, definitely. Like, you definitely need to talk more in the future, because I feel like this is one of the most important things that people need to deal with, especially, you know, the world's on fire.
Yeah. All right, sweetie. Thank you.
No problem. It was great talking to you.